Okay, I think we're good to go for the introduction while we wait for the final attendees to join our call. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today's HFS webinar entitled The Why, What and How of HFS Top 10. My name is Stephen Tellman, and I look after the relationship with some of the larger service provider clients, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I'm delighted that we have 4 of our esteemed analysts joining today's call, and I'm sure that most of you are very familiar with them already. So I'll briefly introduce today's panelists to you. We have Phil Furst, our CEO and Chief Analyst. A world-renowned analyst and highly sought-after speaker, Phil coined the now familiar industry terms, the as-a-service economy, the digital one-office, and more recently, the hyper-connected economy, of which you will hear much more in our future events and research. Next, we will hear from our Chief Strategy Officer, Saurabh Gupta, who has hopefully recovered from his jet lag after attending the NASSCOM event in Bangalore last week. Saurabh is in charge of our research agenda and advisory practice, and he also authors our blockchain and F&A research. Next, we have Jamie Snowden, also a member of our leadership team. And as Chief Data Officer, Jamie likes to be called the King of Spreadsheets, or maybe that should be the King of Tableau now, as you will shortly find out at the end of his session, when Jamie will give us a glimpse of the latest HFS data services. And finally, I'd like to welcome Elena Christopher. As a Research Vice President, Elena leads our North America research, heads up our industry vertical research, and is also in charge of our automation agenda. So today's webinar has 4 different items, and we certainly aim to leave some time for Q&A at the end. If you have any questions during the session, can I please ask that you type them in the Q&A box at the top of your screen, and we will try and cover what we can at the end of the call. We will then respond individually to any remaining questions afterwards. So we will kick off with Phil to understand why HFS has made the possibly controversial decision to terminate the 2x2 blueprint grids. With Saurabh Gupta, we will talk about the methodology around our new HFS Top 10 format, and we'll discuss how this differentiates us from other analyst grids. Saurabh will then give us a glimpse of the latest research agenda and the upcoming top 10 reports. And finally, you will hear from Jamie and Elena, who will give you an exclusive preview of some of our latest research and upcoming data products. So without further ado, let me hand over to our CEO and Chief Analyst, Phil Furst, who will tell us why quadrants, peaks, and blueprints are the past and rankings are the future. Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. You hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Brilliant, okay. So, yeah, welcome everybody today. Yeah, we felt, because we'd made quite a momentous decision with our top 10 launch, that we'd spend some time with you all today so we can talk about this with you a bit, so we can advance here, Stephen. Yeah, so how would you describe, these last 2 decades of the IT analyst industry? And I think we'd all agree that it's, we've been going over the same thing many, many different times and expecting different outcomes. So let's move and talk a bit about today's analyst industry, Stephen. So I think it's been a very hard industry to break into. We can talk about that from our HFS experience. It's an industry that's very obsessed with a lot of sort of traditional legacy brands. It's, it's been crawling with a lot of individuals, many of whom have left the analyst industry and set up their own shops. Some have come from vendors, or some have come from consultancies. It's a real mixed bag of people around the place, but the smaller boutiques seem to be dwindling now. We've been very dominated by the Magic Quadrant and Wave and Blueprint and Marketscape, and these sort of the peaks and many of these other different 2x2 matrices. And I think a lot of people have got very tired of them. We've experienced many clients telling us they don't get a lot of value on the end user side from these anymore because they're too nebulous and they don't really mean anything to them in many cases. We see a lot of content being increasingly commoditized. You know, people are suspicious of a lot of these rankings they see these days. And one of the things we picked up on a lot is people putting out scatterplot 2x2 ratings where sometimes 6 to even 10 of the leading vendors in the space weren't even there because they self-selected out. And that's not something we let happen at HFS. And, you know, we struggle a lot as well with the changing market. It's a lot about headlines. It's a lot about big impact. People want to read a couple of bullet points. People are really, on the whole, struggle to read the 30-page white paper these days. So there's a big shift in the digestion of data and research and how research firms can stay, you know, really relevant in the market. And next slide. So we look at kind of the old model. A lot of it was around, you know, people had to buy research. They had to be a client of a particular analyst company. Not they didn't want to be. They had to be. A lot of the analysts made suppliers, you know, sweat a lot around, you know, how to perform well in their reports. A lot of research comes out often sounding a bit like the press release. You know, how many times you hear analysts come back from conferences and just put out something that sounded very much like an advertorial, you know, when really people want to read more objective, actionable research from analysts with real depth and insight. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see more about the HFS model, which is based very much on knowledge and influence and impact. You know, we attack this market kind of like a digital disruptor in this space. You know, we came along 9 years ago where we had a very influential blog, and we decided we would flood the market with a lot of research to get people really hooked into what we do, and then we could actually sell subscription services, because we always took the attitude research kind of sells and relationships actually renew. Over the last 9 years, we've built a company which focuses a lot on doing summits and roundtables with our clients. We now do 10 major roundtables a year that are very focused on core areas like blockchain or analytics or automation or digital. And then we do a couple of big summits where we bring, you know, like 200 of our top clients and networks together. So we really disseminate our research through both physical and digital channels very aggressively. We do make about 40% of our research freely available, because we believe that people shouldn't have to pay for the top 10 trends, but they will pay for data and relationship and deep dive insight. So we'll put out a lot of our thinking research out to the industry because we feel it gets everybody excited. It helps give us a thought leadership position in those areas, and it helps get people more attracted to what we do. People used to joke that we were kind of like the Facebook of research, where a lot of people were, you know, a member without necessarily, you know, paying for it. Obviously, we've had to change that a little bit with recent events, but that's very much how we built the company. We have an enormous amount of data, and you'll be hearing a lot about that later from my colleague Jamie Snowden, and we pull that together in a very digestible format for our clients. Next slide. And if you just populate this briefly, Stephen, you can see just a bit about our evolution. We opened the company 9 years ago. It doesn't feel like 9 years ago, but it actually was. You know, we did some pretty momentous things, like we introduced the term robotic process automation to the industry in 2012. We launched our own blueprint in 2013. We felt we had to at the time to be competitive in the industry. We obviously started the company in the United States, but we added our UK and India offices in the last 2 or 3 years, and they've become very busy with additional staff, and we've really become a global company as a result. And we've been able to launch our Fora Leadership Council as well, the future of operations in a robotic age. And you've probably been seeing a lot of our events branded under this banner as well. Next slide. You know, in terms of coverage, you can see we look at something we increasingly call digital operations. We see this coming together of analytics and data automation and artificial intelligence into a kind of a AAA trifecta we talk about. And then we really try and look at emerging tech and how that's impacting the future of business ops. So emerging digital business models, we're spending a lot more time investing in covering startups, digitech firms, fintechs, martechs, insurtechs, healthtechs. We are covering them all. And we also keep to our roots of global sourcing. How do we access talent, third-party support, etc. as we evolve? And we're also developing a really, really strong industry-leading competency in blockchain. You'll hear my colleague Saurabh talking about next. Just to touch upon briefly some of our methodologies, Stephen mentioned the Digital One Office. We've been talking about this for 2 years now, and many major enterprises have adopted our methodology, where we look at the core customer needs of the enterprise, where a lot of the digital design, the digital strategy is developed. We look at how we integrate in a mobile, touchless, social interaction in a personalized way with our clients. Then how do we wrap the operations around the needs of the customers and break down those silos and barriers between the front and the back office? So how do we look at the digital underbelly, where we look at the unification of data, cloudification, automation of data? We look at the support structures of the company. So marketing, finance, HR, procurement, supply chain, IT, and how does this come together as more of an inclusive digital mindset? How do you unify the outcomes across these functions? How do you get people thinking more alike? How do you start to wrap the needs of the customers into the processes and not have silos in the organization? And then finally, we look at the kind of the brain of the company, the predictive digital insights of those businesses. As we look at cognitive, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. It's all about being collaborative, dynamic, responsive, and simplified with our approach. So if you click on Stephen, you can see where this all kind of fits together. If we look at the reality of the industry we're in, many of our enterprises today are still pretty much being run the same way as they were in the 70s, right? Where IT does things one way, finance does certain things another way, supply chain another way, etc., in a fairly stovepipe model. And all we've been doing over the last 3 decades is leveraging technology, the internet, and digital to look at things like offshoring and outsourcing, to do things kind of in the same way as we were before, but a little bit smarter, a little bit more simplified, a little bit cheaper. And then we're coming out of this era we call basic digital, which is all about how do we respond to the needs of customers as those needs occur. So it's getting more real time with our ability to respond digitally to our customers. And we're moving into this digital one office model I was talking about, where it becomes much more anticipatory. So how do we start to think ahead? How do we start to have data that can actually help us make decisions about our customers even before those actions actually occur? So how do we leverage supply chain information, macro information? How do we get more intelligent with cognitive assistance, etc., to really start to understand how hyper-connected these enterprises are becoming and how we can really leverage technology to do that. But the fundamental thing that we're addressing with all our clients right now is the digital one office drives a change that no one's really made before. You know, finally, we can't keep papering over the cracks, shaving another 10 or 20% of cost, and keep doing things the same way as we always have done. Now it's about really fundamentally redesigning our processes, really understanding how to manage our data, really looking at the roles of our talent within our organizations, and almost redesigning roles and capabilities around where we're going in a hyper-connected sense. So that's how we're viewing the world, and you'll hear a bit more about our research agenda with how we're driving this shortly. So to conclude, I think the introduction here is, you know, we're no longer in the 2x2 grid business. We made a strategic decision that while it was a roaring success for us, and we did make some good money out of it, we produced a lot of great research out of these blueprint reports, and we are making this conversion over to the top 10. We've produced about 5 of them already, and we'll be sharing some of those with many of you who've joined today. Why did we do this? We want our analysts to take a stand and not just produce these lovely matrices where, you know, everyone's a winner and takes home a prize. The voice of the customer is really the critical component of this. It really drives a more meaningful way for enterprises to make decisions and make shortlists. They want us to say, look, I'm moving into an analytics-driven environment. who should I look at? Send me a short list. Send me the top 10, the top 15 vendors you have and how you put those together, because they trust us. And it's forcing us to take a stand. It's driving maybe some more heated conversations with the vendors, but ultimately it's moving us to a much more engaged, intimate and collaborative dialogue, because we're covering the top 10 regardless of whether these vendors opted in or not. We cover them because they're in the top 10. And so we get these calls from vendors on, oh, how do we do better? How do we get better at this? And it's like, well, you know, we're talking to your customers all the time. We have our methodologies. We do this independently of you. So, you know, we have to change the dialogue into something that is less apolitical, it's more engaged, it's more intimate, it's more collaborative, you know, it's more customer driven. It also really focuses the conversations much more, you know, around a relationship and less about this kind of he said, she said, tactical bake-off. You know, we just got fed up with the way these matrices were driving relationships into a sort of different type of model. And we wanted to take a break from that and have a refreshing change. And we hope that people are already feeling the impact of that and are engaging us in a slightly more meaningful way. So in that regard, I'd like to now leave you with one more message, that we didn't have to change. We could have just carried on playing the same game as everybody else and probably carried on very happily regardless. But we didn't want to see this industry decline. And we felt that when we start to see some of the second tier analyst firms coming in and one of them claiming they're going to do several hundred of these matrices over the next year, we just said, we're out of this game. It's going to end up in obsolescence. It's just going to drive people crazy. There's going to be no value left. We have to revert this back to the voice of the customer and really drive a positive view of the market and where it's going and get some proper conversation back on the table. So with that, I will now hand off back to Stephen, and we'll get into the nitty gritty of where we're going to be covering the industry with these top 10s.
Thank you very much, Phil. We're getting one or two questions in already. So just a reminder for people who joined slightly later that there is a Q&A box at the top of your screen. Feel free to enter your questions there, and we'll try and get to what we can at the end of the webinar and then respond to other people individually. So I would like to now introduce Saurabh Gupta and ask Saurabh, while some of our clients are actually wondering if this is a simple rebranding exercise, what are the true differentiators in the top 10 rankings compared to traditional grids? Over to you, Saurabh.
Hey, thanks, Stephen. So yeah, a lot of our clients have been asking us, so what do these top 10 look like? How do you build those? How are they different from our erstwhile blueprint grids and frankly, other 2x2 grids? And I thought the best way to answer those questions is by showing you some of the results of our top 10 research. As Phil mentioned, we've already launched quite a few of these top 10 reports. And I'll be taking you through a few of them, a snapshot of a couple of them to just show how these look and feel and what really is the difference. And I hope by the end of today's conversation, you'll really feel that we are trying to make a change here. So this one is from our recently released infrastructure and enterprise cloud services top 10. And as you can see, it's very different from a 2x2. And if we click on, I think I'll highlight 3 or 4 key areas of how these are different, right? So number one, it's a ranking. It's not a grid, right? That's very clear. And I think, as Phil mentioned, we want our analysts to take a stand. We don't want everybody to be in this fuzzy little winners box and everybody's a winner, right? We want a ranking, and that's what our enterprise clients have been asking us. Second, and very importantly, it's simple to understand, right? It is clear and simple. You don't have to rely on the analyst's take to understand who is where, because it's a ranking. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, up to however many service providers we've tracked. Also, what is important is while it's simple, it allows us to be multidimensional. even as you can see on this ranking list, we have three broad dimensions that we've covered. We are looking at each of those 18 players across their enterprise cloud services on three dimensions. One is how well are they able to execute, how well are they able to innovate, and what are the customers saying about them. This is going to be extremely hard, these three dimensions to be portrayed on a 2x2. As you can imagine, there's only as much as you can do on a two-dimensional sort of a grid, and hence the top 10 framework allows us to make this multi-dimensional, and as Phil was mentioning, bring out the voice of the customer in a very meaningful way that was always hidden under the covers in any 2x2 sort of a grid. And then last but not the least, the voice of the customer is at the front and center of the HFS Top 10. If you look at our strategy, we want to be the voice of the customer. And what we are doing, as I'll talk a little bit more about as we cover the methodology behind these top 10s, we are not only reaching out to the reference clients that our service providers are sharing with us, but we are reaching out to our own network of the global 2000 companies to understand what the real clients are saying about their vendors. So here's another look at the top 10, right? And this one I took from another top 10 report that we published on the cognitive assistant services, right? And these are the rankings of service providers who are delivering cognitive assistant services to enterprise clients. And as you can see, one of the great advantages of having a top 10 sort of a methodology is that we can start to peel the onion, right? So we look at not only the three broad dimensions, as I was showing you earlier, the ability to execute, the innovation capability, and the voice of the customer, but we can peel the onion, right? For example, in this particular report, within the innovation capability, we looked at consulting and design, we looked at vision and roadmap, and we looked at how well the service providers are focusing on business outcomes. And it's not a sort of a stagnant ranking, right? While IBM might have been the leader overall, you'll see that when you start to look at different dimensions, other service providers start to emerge. For example, Cognizant has a really strong partner ecosystem and also a very strong vision and roadmap that makes it rise up to the top. And similarly, you'll find Accenture to be really strong in consulting and design compared to the overall leader. So I think what the top 10 also allows us to do is to start peeling the onion and show the results of our research in a much more meaningful, easily digestible way that is just not possible through a 2x2 matrix. If we next page. Yeah, so here's another sort of snapshot or a page from another top 10 report that we published, and this one is from the top 10 RPA products, where we looked at the 10 sort of RPA products from UiPath to Blue Prism to Automation Anywhere to 10 more of the prominent RPA products. And each of these top 10 reports has a very in-depth profile about each of the service providers or the vendors that we are covering. And as you can see from this, right, on the left-hand side, you can not only see the rankings at a fairly granular level, but you can also start to learn about the DNA of these products, right? And it's very hard to, I think a lot of analysts are able to share the data around service providers and products, but as we enter this hyper competitive world, what the clients really want to understand is what is the DNA. If we are talking about autonomy in this example, what does autonomy really look like, right? What are their strengths? What are the customers saying about their strengths, and what are the customers saying about their development opportunities? And I think if you look at all our top 10 reports, the profiles, these detailed profiles, not only share the data about the products and the service providers, but they start to unearth the DNA of the provider. What really does it feel to be a client for these service providers and these products? And I think that's immensely helpful to our clients. So let's go on to the next page and talk about the methodology. So how do we do this, right? And I think there are 5 differences. One, as I mentioned, it's a ranking, it's not a grid. It's a simple, clear ranking of the assessed products versus a complicated 2x2 grid. Number 2, there are 3 dimensions that we've picked on for each of our top 10s. And those are innovation, execution, and voice of the customer. Now, for some of our clients who've been with us for a very long time, will remember the innovation and execution dimensions. Those were the 2 dimensions on which we used to create our blueprint grids. What we've been able to do is to add the voice of the customer on our top 10 rankings, and all these 3 dimensions have equal weightages. So so the final ranking will depend on how well are you able to execute, what is your product or service roadmap, or your ability to innovate, and then what are the customers really saying about you, right? And those 3 have equal weightages. The third big difference is that these top 10 reports are powered by our own network across the global 2000 enterprises, right? That is the primary source of data. And we've invested a lot over the last year or so going and collecting inputs from clients across all the major service providers that we track in terms of surveys, in terms of analyst interviews, in terms of ongoing dialogue. And that really is our core competitive differentiator, is our ability to have this network, and a network which is not only engaged but is willing to participate in our research and share with us what they really feel about their service providers. And we're bringing that to bear in our top 10 reports. So if we keep moving, we're not only reliant on what the RFI responses from the service providers, but we are relying on our own data sources. And that is what true research feels like, right? It shouldn't be that you are simply aggregating and summarizing all the responses that you've got from the 20 or 25 service providers that you're trying to track, but you're going and doing your own primary research. And that's what we're trying to do with these top 10. And what this methodology also allows us, and Phil alluded this to a little earlier, is there is no opt-out, right? We select who the service providers or the products that we want to track. And given that we have the power of our network, we are able to do a robust job of researching every service provider, irrespective of whether they want to or do not want to submit us the information that in the RFI. So I think those really, it might look like a simple change, and that is really what we are intending it to be, to make the research simple and digestible. But if you start to look under the hood, there is a lot going on to make this a reality. And these 5 points for me summarize the big differences. So yeah, let's keep moving. Yeah, Stephen.
Sorry, just mentioning we are getting a bunch of questions coming in, primarily around clarifying some of the key differentiators that you have mentioned there. So we will get to those towards the end of the call, and I keep encouraging people to submit their questions in the Q&A box at the top. But before we get to that, could you expand a little around our key coverage areas going forward, Saurabh, and also have a look at the upcoming top 10 reports that the people on the call can expect?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think this page summarizes what we are trying to do here at HFS. I think I call it a 4-dimensional research agenda. We are looking at areas of coverage across 4 dimensions. Number 1 is the digital one office, which Phil eloquently explained. That is the why for us, right? That gives us the vision and the mission in life. That is our vision for enterprises going forward. And that also allows us to talk about some of the big ticket items, like what's going to happen to talent, and how do you attack change management. So digital one office is something that is a critical component of our research. Number two is what we call the change agents. We like the term change agents a lot more than emerging technologies because essentially what they're trying to do is drive change and drive impact. And we look at change agents across multiple horizons. You've got the AAA trifecta of automation, artificial intelligence, and smart analytics, which is really revving up this industry of digital operations right now. But you also have the Internet of Things and blockchain, which are seemingly on the gate and will have significant impact going forward. We also continue to look at some of our horizontal functional areas across business services, from front office to F&A to supply chain to IT services across infrastructure, cloud, application development, maintenance, digital consulting, to also engineering services where we look at R&D, product lifecycle management, etc., and some of those topics. And then we've invested a lot over the last year or so in building our industry coverage. And today we are covering the top 10 industries, and no pun intended here, the big industries from banking, financial services to insurance, energy, etc. And essentially, as you look at our top 10s, you'll find top 10s across each of these 4 dimensions that were listed. We've already published 4 of them. As Phil mentioned, we've published one on RPA products that I showed you. We've published one top 10 on cognitive assistant services that I also showed you. We've just published one on Workday Financial Services. We've also published one on infrastructure and cloud services, but there's a lot more coming up. So if you go to the next page, that will give you a sense of the amount of research that's coming from our house. There'll be a lot of reports on change agents that are coming up. Elena, actually, who's on the call today, is just finishing off her RPA services top 10. We've got AI focused top 10 focusing on Microsoft AI. That's coming up, and we've got a bunch of blockchain focused top 10s, both covering the service provider angle as well as the blockchain platforms. We've got a bunch of top 10 reports in business services, from the front office to sourcing and category management to finance and accounting, and even peeling the onion there and getting into financial planning and analysis. My colleague Khalda is working on security and compliance, and we're going to have our first top 10 on cybersecurity services. Jamie is leading our IT services mandate, and very soon you'll see, we've already launched the infrastructure and cloud services, but very soon you'll see the application development maintenance as well as the digital consulting top 10s. And we've got a bunch of industry top 10s coming up. The one that's going to hit the stands very soon is the travel, hospitality, and logistics. But there are quite a few others that are in the works, from energy to high tech to life sciences and healthcare. And last but not the least, we also have a couple of engineering services top 10s. One is going to be focused on telecom engineering services, and the other one is going to be on medical devices. So as you can see, we are keeping ourselves busy, but there's a lot of research. We've already published 4 or 5 really good reports after launching this top 10 in just a couple of months. But over the next 3 or 4 months, you'll see a lot more coming your way.
Thank you very much for that, Saurabh. So for the fourth part of our agenda, I would like to hand over to Jamie Snowden and to Elena Christopher for a sneak preview into some of the latest research and upcoming data services that we have. And Jamie has had the courage to take you to a live demo screen here. So so far so good. Over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So this is where it kind of all goes wrong usually, but yeah. So I just wanted to talk to you about some of the products and tools that HFS is launching at the moment. These are based on Tableau, so they're going to be downloadable Tableau files that people will have to have a Tableau reader or a license of Tableau to do. But it's free to download, and you know, you can get it from the Tableau website. And the first of these tools that I wanted to talk about was something that is akin, is linked to one of the top 10 reports that we did earlier. It's our RPA product selector tool, and this is part of the the ongoing RPA research that we've done, and over the last kind of 12 months, we've interviewed a large number of companies about and users of RPA products, and we've asked them to give us feedback on the leading 10 of those products, and their experience with using each of those products. We asked them a whole heap of questions, so it's a relatively big survey, and this has allowed us to build actually a very rich set of data on all of these different products, and what we thought we ought to do, and so that we could make the most of the data that we had, was to build a tool that allows basically anyone to weight the different criteria. So there's over 35 different criteria here, so that you can build a picture of your own RPA product assessment, and you can get an idea of of which of the products would best suit you. And so I can just give you an example of this. So if I take out the AI capability, so from the RPA product, so if I remove that as a criteria, you see that it does shift the needle somewhat in Blue Prism's favor. If I then take out this one here, so sort of whether the customers felt that there was a realization of cost saving from the particular product. If I remove that, you can see that it has access to all of the 10 the data behind all of the 10 suppliers, and you can pretty much do that to your heart's content and get a different cut of these different providers. And part of the reason why I'm talking about this on the top 10 call is because we're building a very similar tool, which we will launch over the next couple of weeks, that goes hand in hand with the top 10 reports themselves. So it will give access and more detail behind. So you'll see slightly behind the curtain of the different scores. So the execution, the innovation, and the voice of the customer. But it will also give the ability to change the weighting behind that, and you can see that change both the overall criteria, but also the individual pieces. I now move on to sort of the next tool. So hopefully you can all see this. So this is our RPA case study compendium. So again, this kind of goes hand in hand with part of what we want to do and what we want to achieve with our research is to use as much of the data and much of the research as we can possibly do, and this takes 150 use cases that we've found in the RPA world, and it's so we have all of that information. We have it by industry, we have it by company size and different parameters, but it allows someone to go in and so if you select one of these different, so all of these dots represent a specific use case. So you can select a case, and then you can get some information about so over here on the specific use case. So if I then show you the way that you can cut the data, so that you can slice and dice it and see it from a different angle, a different selection. So you have a horizontal and a vertical axis that you can change that parameter for. You can change it by industry, by company size, by the geographic scope of the agreement, the timeline. So that's kind of how quick or the implementation time of the specific the specific project. So for example, if I was an insurance company and I was looking to quick impact projects, I could take a look along here. I could see the insurance line. I could click on that button there, which gives me the projects that took less than 6 months. And then I could look in here and I could see examples of use cases for RPA that fulfilled those my specific criteria. And of course, there's other ones across that row. So that was just a sneak preview of that product, and that's something that we're launching hopefully in the next week or so. And finally, sort of after my own heart, which is the market sizing and forecasting that HFS has done for quite a long time. And I'm only going to mention this very briefly. So this basically allows you to, so this takes the total IT and business services market. You can slice it by industry. You can slice it by the difference between one office and the traditional services markets. You can slice it by service line. You can slice it by the different geographic regions, plus a country view. And so if I put it back there, you can then see. So for example, we have the IT professional service. So this box here, you can change these different views as well. But you can click on that box and you can select the professional services view of and have that sliced and split into what is essentially sort of digital and one office at the top, and traditional professional services at the bottom. So that was just as I said, just a quick preview of these things, and I just want to hand over to Elena.
Thank you, Jamie. That's probably the shortest demo time you've ever been given. So thanks for sticking to time and taking us through a sneak preview.
If anyone is interested in these products and has a bit longer, so has half an hour or so, then please reach out and I'll be more than happy to have a personal demo. So please do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Elena, our last panelist on the call, if I can just come to you and take back control of the screen. Just checking whether there are any particular slides that you wanted me to share for you, Elena, or is there anything?
I think if you just forge ahead, Stephen, there should be a slide that brings up, because what I'm going to do, folks, is continuing. Let's just keep clicking through those. Yep, let's leave it right here. I get to continue our theme. Oh, let's go back one, please, to the industry dashboard. Thank you. So I get to continue the theme of giving you some sneak peeks of new and hopefully interesting research that we're putting out there. In some of Sarb's comments, he had mentioned that we've really expanded our industry research coverage, which is an area that I'm proud to have a leadership responsibility for. But we actually are tracking 11 industries, and we do a variety of work around industries, but among them, we of course do a top 10 report, and that's the theme of our call today. But we'll do a top 10 report for each of our target industries, where ultimately we're assessing the leading providers for industry-specific services, not horizontal services that happen to be delivered within an industry, but truly industry-specific services like order management, for example, in telecommunications, or customer onboarding, or KYC in banking. So we'll do our top 10 reports, but we really have a very strong belief at HFS that if you're going to understand what companies operating in an industry are really able to do, what type of change is even available to them, what their challenges are, what transformation is going to be like, and really with a great depth of context, we feel very strongly it's important to understand some of the key trends within industries. And so to try and have an HFS response to that, we've developed what's up on the slide now, which is what we call our industry health rating. This is an example from the telecommunications sector that we published earlier this year. I think, Stephen, if you click once, it'll just bring up a little tile on the screen. But we're doing these for each of our industries, and we'll actually publish these. We're pulling a lot of content out of the the top 10 reports, so to make it more accessible to a broad readership base. But we really want this research about industry trends and the health of sectors to be available as part of our POV or point of view documents. But really what we're trying to do here is to have an easy snapshot way that to gain perspective on the relative health of an industry. And then we provide a variety of detail behind each of these tiles. But essentially what we're doing is we're drawing on multiple measures of growth and relative industry fortitude to assess the overall well-being of a particular industry. For this particular example on telecommunications, we looked at elements such as revenue and profit for the top 100 publicly traded telecommunications firms. We did also do some analysis because we realized that the top 10 telcos versus the other 90 have very different profiles in terms of their profit. And we also look at some other industry specific metrics like wireless growth at average revenue per user on a worldwide basis to really get a picture of this critical growth metric for this sector. We're also looking at market cap to really understand how market cap growth has changed for firms, because that really helps us understand shares outstanding in the marketplace and just another perspective on how to understand really what the trajectory of an industry actually is. We also look at factors such as M&A growth, trying to figure out what's going on with telecom deals. Is there a lot of growth? Where is the growth? Because that really helps us understand and gauge the climate and focus within this marketplace. We look at VC funding essentially as a proxy to try and measure some of the new entrants into the marketplace. We found this to be a really interesting proxy for identifying what the trends are around potential disruptors within a marketplace. And then we've also looked at IPO growth, just trying to figure out really what's going on in the public markets. Are companies within a given sector actually going into public markets and launching their IPOs? We essentially bring these factors together and we do customize them based on what the most important metrics are per industry. And then we launch them, we score them, and we put them together to get an overall, again, quick snapshot industry rating. For telecommunications, you can see that the overall rating was 2.7, which we deem as lagging. In any case, you can expect this type of research for each one of the 11 sectors that HFS tracks. Stephen, let's go to the next slide, please. Changing topics, in addition to industry research, another new type of research that we launched in 2018 is our HFS Hot Vendors. What we've got up here on the screen is just showing you a snapshot of the vendors that we covered in Q1 and Q2. We launched this report, this type of report, at the beginning of the year to really give an opportunity to small and up-and-coming companies in the marketplace that may not be big enough to make it into our top 10 research, but that we feel are exciting for a variety of reasons due to their distinctiveness, their client impact, potentially their financial position. Given that we're HFS, we're always looking particularly for interesting up-and-coming providers that have potential impact on our one office framework. And so we, and trust me, we get probably on a daily basis, we talk with a number of up-and-coming firms. We take them through our evaluation criteria. We do detailed reference checks with them to make sure that there's really some fortitude behind what their marketing hype actually has to say. And then once they pass muster, we'll deem them as an HFS hot vendor. And we publish these reports on a quarterly basis. And again, it'll be an interesting cross-section of different types of vendors that are really impacting or have the impact to either impact or disrupt the overall marketplace. And we think that this is really relevant because we all know that increasingly the concept of ecosystem, it was in the hyper-connected slide, that concept that Phil shared with us earlier. This concept of ecosystem is increasingly important, and more, a lot of these small and up-and-coming players have a very strong and emerging role to play. And so this is part of the HFS commitment to help really identify who those up-and-coming players are. So this is our snapshot for Q1 and Q2, and we've just issued Q3, and that is available as a freemium report to our entire readership base. And I think with that, Stephen, I turn it back to you to conclude. and hopefully get some time for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Elena. We do have a few minutes left for Q&A. And thank you very much to all the attendees. I have received 21 questions, so unfortunately we won't have time for all of those. What I have done during the last few minutes or so is just consolidated a few of the similar questions and picked some of the topic areas that I hope will be interesting to most of the audience. We will then get to the remaining questions individually and respond to people in the next day or so. So thank you also to our panelists. I would like to open up with a question around fact checks. So maybe that can go to Saurabh. A question: will there still be fact checks with the vendors, Saurabh?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I don't think that's a process that we had while we were doing the blueprints, and there is no reason to change that. What the fact checks though mean is that they are fact checks. They are not negotiations on rankings, right? So what we do is we would send out, for example, the profiles that our analysts have written and ask you to review them for any factual inconsistencies. But in those fact checks, we do not share the rankings because we don't want this to become a sort of a he said, she said negotiation sort of a process, but it is really to make sure if we got anything wrong, then please do correct us for that. But yeah, that process should remain essentially very similar to what it was when we were doing the blueprints, Stephen.
Thank you. I have a bunch of questions around the data that sits behind the top 10 methodologies. So I don't know whether maybe I'll initially turn to Jamie, but anyone feel free to to chime in. In general, what data will populate a top 10 report as a general question?
Yeah, so I think we have access to an awful lot of different things. I conduct a lot of the surveys for HFS. We conduct I think conservatively around 5,000 interviews, sort of primary interviews by telephone every year, but the number then increases because we do an awful lot of analyst level interviews. So the individual analysts will reach out to a number of organizations as part of the process for doing the top 10 reports themselves. So that will be a combination of reference checks where they're supplied by the vendors, but we will also do additional checks where we have someone who's particularly keen on a particular service or topic, and we do that sometimes in advance of doing the top 10 itself, so we can sort of set some of the parameters and do some of the weightings. We would also do and it really does depend on the blueprint itself, or sorry, the top 10 itself. We'll have a number of different things that go into that. So we have a contracts database, we have various other things that will help us to kind of for me it's about sizing and framing the market somewhat, and that helps, but when it comes to assessing the providers, obviously we use the results of the surveys and all of the qualitative information that we have from the references, plus some qualitative information that we also get from those reference checks. Sorry, did I miss anything? I'm not sure.
No, I think you covered it, Jamie. I think essentially the primary source of data, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be our Global 2000 network, right, of these Global 2000 enterprises. And as Jamie was mentioning, we do an awful number of surveys into that 2000 sort of enterprises. And essentially, over the last year or so, we've made a conscious effort to make sure that for all the areas that we cover, we can actually have statistically relevant sample sets to be able to meaningfully share the voice of the customer. So this change of moving toward the top 10 and having the voice of the customer being the front and the center wasn't done in a jiffy, in like where we were having a beer and we suddenly decided let's do this, but it has been planned for the last year or so, where we've been consciously investing and building out our IP to be able to make sure that we can actually do justice to this. And a couple of months back, we felt confident enough that I think if anybody can change this methodology, then it's probably going to be us, and we went ahead with it. But yeah, that's about it.
Excellent, thank you. So one follow-up question on the third dimension around the voice of the customer there. Is there a minimum data set needed to guarantee inclusion? So what happens essentially if there's not enough customer data for one particular
Yes.
vendor?
No, that's a really good question, and the answer is yes. So a good example is the RPA products report, where we had 350 plus sort of power users of RPA who were commenting on the different RPA products. And for some of the products which we wanted to cover, we didn't have enough sample set, and we ultimately did not have them in our report because we felt uncomfortable with the sample set that we had in terms of for that particular product. Now, hopefully, as we continue to mature, we'll add on to that sample set and we'll cover more than 10 products next year. But that's a good example of we are trying to be true to the research process here. We're trying to, I don't think there's a numbers game here, but as long as it's somewhat statistically significant, I think that's what we are aiming for. And that's why all our analysts, me included, are getting pushed into this direction of making sure we are talking to the end customers. That's what we want to be. We want to be the voice of the customer.
Okay, one more question on the 3 dimensions. Do you provide a number or percentage on each of the dimensions for execution, innovation, or voice of the customer? So essentially, it's a question around weightings, as I understand.
Yes, absolutely. So I think the one rule that we have is all those 3 dimensions are equally weighted. So execution, innovation, and voice of the customer all carry equal weight of 33% or 33.33% each. What we, given the length and breadth of the areas that we cover, we sort of have it on a case-by-case basis where each analyst sort of recommends. So for within, let's say if I cover blockchain, the sub-dimensions within innovation will be different than, let's say, when Jamie covers IT ADM, right? And I think we give that flexibility to individual analysts within those 3 broad dimensions. But the framework, the overarching framework is that there are three main dimensions on innovation, execution, and voice of the customer, and all 3 of them have equal weightages. But those weightages are absolutely published within the report. And then, as Jamie mentioned, we are coming up with these tools where people can actually slice and dice and play with those weightages and see if the rankings change.
Okay. As always with buy-side clients, the vendors are often nervous about identifying their clients or being open references. How will clients that are surveyed by HFS for Top 10 reports be identified? I don't know if Sarah or Jamie wants to take this one.
Yeah, I can take a stab at this, and I think when we are talking through in our summits, in our conferences, when we are doing all these surveys, we at least have 2 basic questions in almost all our surveys. And Jamie, you can add to this. One is a familiarity question, which is, so how familiar are you familiar with XYZ vendor? And then second is the degree of involvement question. So if you are familiar, how involved are you? And those give us a good sense of whether that client sort of qualifies to be able to incorporate their feedback into our top tens. But there are a number of different ways of doing this. It's not a very hard thing to imagine. I think the harder thing is to make sure that we have access to these end clients. But we've got a number of ways to figure that out. I don't know, Jamie, if you wanted to add something to that.
No, I mean, I think the only thing is that, there's no, we will obviously keep the any references or any of the any of the survey respondents completely confidential. So I think from that perspective, there is no, we wouldn't give any visibility on how a particular individual were to do their scoring of a specific service provider, and certainly not without permissions and those kind of things, and so we wouldn't give access at that level. When we produce the Tableau, it's at an aggregated level, so just partly because of that specific issue is that we wouldn't want there to be any way in which there could be some kind of identification. So we would aggregate the
Sorry, Jamie, you're fading out there. If you could maybe come a bit closer to the microphone.
Yeah, sorry, I think my headset's dying on me.
Okay,
yeah, so sorry. So basically, we would only give. So there is no way that anyone could even have a sniff of being identified from from the way we would use the data, and certainly the Tableau product is literally behind it is a set of aggregations. There is no specific individual ratings.
Fantastic. Just conscious of time, I think we may be able to squeeze in one or two more. Straightforward question around vendor size. So do vendors need a revenue threshold to be eligible for a top 10 ranking? So I hand that one to Elena maybe, or?
I'm happy to take it, but Saurabh or Jamie, please feel free to jump in here. I can answer from this standpoint, that if you are a player that is working and creating scale within the particular services area, no, we don't look at necessarily a revenue threshold. And I can give you an example. Saurabh made mention that I'm just putting the finishing touches on the RPA services top 10, and we are including a number of what we term the RPA services pure play firms, which as compared to some of the largest global service providers in the world are perhaps decidedly smaller in stature, but they're very relevant in their space, and so therefore certainly appropriate for inclusion. So we're very open. I think rather than revenue, what is much more relevant to us is the impact a provider is making in a particular space. Saurabh, would you, or Jamie, would you have anything to add to that?
I think that's fair, Elena. I really think there's no standard answer to this. I think if you look at a somewhat of a commoditized service, let's say F&A services or IT ADM services, then you'll have 100 plus vendors that we would have to, and we would logically have to put some cutoffs in those kind of cases. But then if you were to analyze, let's say, blockchain or some of AI or some of these areas where the markets are still evolving, then I don't think it makes sense to put a cutoff around revenues. So I think it really depends. I don't think there's one standard answer. What I do agree with Elena is we are not that revenue centric as a number of other analysts are. We are really trying to unearth the DNA of the service provider and what's the kind of impact. But sometimes you need to take a common sense approach. And if you're looking at a very commodity or a very sort of mature area, then you'll have to put some cutoffs. Otherwise, we'll never be able to release a research in 2 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yes.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Excellent. We are over time, unfortunately, so I can't squeeze in any more questions. Just quickly want to turn back to Phil to see if he had a final closing comment at all before I thank our panelists for participating. Phil, anything else from you in closing?
No, I'm good. It was good to hear the views from everybody on the team today. So thank you very much for your time explaining a lot of this. I know it's not always simple, but I think we want to be relevant. We want to get this research out to market faster, quicker for everybody. I mean, sometimes markets are moving so fast. If you take 6 months over these reports, the market's already moved on by the time it's out. And we're trying to cover a lot of emerging spaces as well, which do cover startups as well as some traditional players. So that answers the last question, I think. So, we want to work more intimately with people. We want to have a relationship that's based on a more strategic conversation and not necessarily dominated by this kind of fairly tired politics where we're having this back and forth the whole time about grid placements and that sort of thing. And the other thing it's doing is it's forcing some people to wake up and actually look at a market that's force ranked as opposed to this fairly fluffy view of everybody's got a prize to take home today. Everyone looks fantastic. Because at the end of the day, if you're just focused on selling licenses to vendors, yeah, that's great. Stay in that business, but that's not where we want to be. We are dealing very much with the end users all the time, and we want to do research that's relevant and useful to them, as that's our future of the business. So we do appreciate everybody for their interest, support with us as they, we try and do things differently, and really appreciate the time today that everyone's given to join us. So, we'll try and answer any more questions you have, and we'll send you down a copy of this webinar as well, and hope we can have many more interesting conversations about this in the future.
Yes, thank you, Phil. That was one other question I had, that the slides will indeed be available for people who are interested, and also the session has been recorded, so a replay will also be available in the next few days. Thank you to all the attendees. Hope to see or hear you again at our next webinar, maybe one of our roundtable events or our summit in New York in December. Thank you very much to our panelists, to Phil, Saurabh, Jamie, and Elena, and I wish everyone a fantastic rest of the day. Thank you all for joining.